We provide business class phone with customizable features and fast, reliable internet. Your knowledgeable team at Technology Solutions has a broad base of IT services to meet your needs. Let the experts at Marketing Solutions get your message to the right people on the best platforms. The only piece missing is your business. Call Eagle Communications today at 877-61-EAGLE.
Hello there. Good morning. It is 11 o'clock Central Time, 10 o'clock Mountain, and you're watching News Channel Nebraska. My name's Eric McKay. Thank you so much for joining us. In just a few moments, we will be taking you live to Central Nebraska. U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts back in his home state and hosting town halls over the next couple of days. He has two scheduled for tomorrow, but today we'll be presenting you his town hall live in its entirety. Obviously, town halls have been volatile for all elected officials of late, with a lot of frustration being reflected over many of the policies that have been enacted over the first 100 days of the Trump presidency, many of which have been co-signed by Ricketts, one of the more vocal supporters of President Trump's policies thus far. So let's hear what the folks have to say to him about it, and let's hear Senator Ricketts' thoughts on how the first 100 days have gone. Let's take you live now to the town hall meeting with U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts.
His service to our state and nation is greatly appreciated. My job in this opening is to talk about how this event's going to run, how the question and answer is going to work, how the program's going to work. So I'm going to provide that information for you now. Very shortly after I'm done, Pastor Clark will deliver a brief invocation. After that, Senator Ricketts will provide opening remarks and an update on his effort to bring Nebraska solutions to Washington before moving to questions and answers. There will be two question and answer options for you, which will be alternated. Before asking a question, either at the microphone or in writing, please lead with your name and where you're from. There was an option to submit a written question as you entered. The basket for questions is with Sarah in the back, and Sarah is in the green jacket. So if you feel most comfortable writing a question, you can provide that to Sarah. Please submit any other remaining written questions to the basket during Senator Ricketts' opening comments if you haven't already done so. Also, you can email your question to events@ricketts.senate.gov. And then finally, there will also be an option to ask questions at the microphone. Noah and Brad will stand at the side of the room with microphones. So Brad is in the corner in the blue jacket. Noah over there with the other blue jacket and the glasses in the back. They will be going around the room and providing the microphone. So written questions and questions from the microphone will be alternated, as I said earlier, every 3 questions. And then Noah will draw questions when we get to that point in the program and read them out loud to Senator Ricketts. Okay. So that's the housekeeping items. So we're going to begin. I'd ask you all to stand. We're going to do a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Please stay standing, and I'll ask Pastor Clark to offer our invocation.
I think when he made that introduction, he said something about pastor and a brief invocation. I think there was something that the mayor was going to say. Okay, well done. Thank you for standing with us as we pray. Let's assume an attitude of prayer. Father, we love you today. Thank you for loving us, blessing us with this, another day of life. I ask that you will bless this gathering, each and every one represented here. Give this gathering a sense of peace and understanding. Thank you for those who serve our nation. Thank you for Senator Ricketts to be here. Bless him in the work that he does. Bless all those that serve their communities and their constituents. Father, thank you for this great nation. We ask that you will bless us with your presence. Father, teach us always to rely on you. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. And now, Senator Ricketts.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you for your service to Kearney. And Pastor Clark, thank you very much. And then also, thank you for the work you're doing with hot meals. You've got a bunch of meals you're preparing here in Kearney and taking them up to Brown County for the firefighters up there. I think you said you get about 150 of them that you're taking care of. So thank you very much for that. And thank you all. Yeah, give me a round of applause. That's nice. And thank you all very much for coming out today to talk about the important issues that we face in Washington, D.C. As the mayor said, I've got some topics we're going to cover, and then we'll open up to questions and answers so we can go into further details on those topics, or you can ask questions about other topics if you want. And then we'll wrap this all up by noon and be respectful of everybody's time to keep us on schedule. So the deal is that Republicans took control of both we're in charge of the House and now the Senate and the White House. And John Thune is our new leader in the Senate. And he's got this crazy idea that we should work Monday through Friday like normal people. And what that means is we are actually scheduled to be in session 57 more days this year than we were last year. Think about that. It's almost 2 months more in session this year than we were in the same 12-month period last year. And in fact, we've actually already spilled over from Friday into Saturday morning several times already. In fact, we had some votes that went till about a little after 2 in the morning, right before we had a 2-week recess right here when we were voting on the continuing resolution. That went till like 4:30 in the morning on Saturday. So a lot going on. In fact, if you look at what we've been able to accomplish over the course of the last it's been about 100 days now, you see that we were actually in session for 10 weeks in a row from the start of the year. That's the first time since, well, at least in 15 years that's happened. We've been able to get all of Trump's nominees, cabinet nominees, appointed, and that happened in a time frame faster than I think any time in the last 15 years. We've been able to approve about 50 nominees, including ambassadors and other appointees, and that's also the fastest it's happened since, faster than Biden, Obama, and Bush. And we've also taken about 200 roll call votes, which is the most votes we've taken in the first 100 days going back to the Reagan era. So you can see there's been a lot going on in Washington, D.C. We've been in session a lot, working on getting all this stuff done. In addition to all those nominees I just talked about, and there's generally, I think, about 1,200 nominees that have to be approved of by the U.S. Senate whenever you've got a new administration. So there's a lot to do there. But we also were able to pass 2 different laws that address the border security, which was one of President Trump's promises. The first is the Laken-Riley Act. In fact, that was the first bill I think the president signed. And this was based on the issue that we had, when Jose Ibarra killed Laken Riley in Georgia. He was an illegal immigrant that had actually been picked up a couple of times by the cops, once for child endangerment, once for shoplifting. But he wasn't detained. And actually, we had the same issue here with Sarah Root when Eswin Mejia killed her right after she graduated from Bellevue College. He wasn't detained, he was able to post bail, and he fled the country. Now, he's since been apprehended, and we're working on his extradition to bring him back to this country. But both those cases outline the problems when ICE doesn't do its job and pick up illegal immigrants who've committed additional crimes and detain them. And so that's what the Laken-Riley Act and the Sarah's Law was incorporated into that as well. It requires ICE and the Department of Homeland Security to work with local law enforcement agencies to be able to detain illegal immigrants who've committed those crimes and hold them so that they can be properly adjudicated and ultimately deported. That's going to help make it safer. So that's an important thing that we got passed and the president signed into law. Another one related to border security is the HALT Fentanyl Act. Now, one of the crazy things, at least I think it's crazy, is that we know fentanyl is a very dangerous drug. It's a leading killer of young people age 18 to 45. 70,000 people annually die from fentanyl overdose. Yet we would have to make that a Schedule I drug every year. We would have to pass that again, even though we all know how dangerous it is. So the Halt Fentanyl Act makes it permanently, put fentanyl permanently on that Schedule 1 list so that you could increase the penalties for trafficking fentanyl and that sort of thing. And we wouldn't have to keep going back and doing that over and over and over again. And that will, again, help cut down on the trafficking of fentanyl that's coming across our borders and making sure that we're taking a strong stand against that. So those are two of the bills that we got passed. There's also something that we do called Congressional Review Acts. Now what these are basically the Congress can try to overturn a regulation that the executive office does, or the executive branch does. We've done that 7 times on different Biden-era regulations where the Biden administration was trying to expand the scope, the bureaucrats were trying to expand the scope of what their authority was outside of the laws that Congress passed. So for example, I led one about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau where they were expanding their authority outside of the banking era into payment systems. So they were supposed to stick to the banking, and they were trying to do it for other payment systems that we use. And what kind of the crazy part about this is, those payment systems, by and large, are people very pleased with, like Venmo, right? The number of complaints we get from those is really tiny compared to other complaints that we get. But they tried to expand their authority in that, so I introduced a Congressional Review Act to block that regulation. And this is where, again, having a delegation that works together, Mike Flood introduced the companion bill in the House, so we got those passed, and now that was sent to the White House for the President's signature. We've done that for a variety of other regulations, everything from trying to restrain the IRS from going after cryptocurrency companies to blocking regulations like the natural gas tax the Biden administration wanted to put in place. They also had regulations that would increase the cost for consumers around things like freezers and coolers and water heaters and stuff like that. All stuff that they want to add regulations to that would increase the cost for consumers. So we passed 7 of those, and some of those have already been signed. Like I said, the one I passed is still waiting to be on the President's desk right now. But those are also some of the things we've been able to get accomplished in the first 100 days or so. Now, another thing that we did right before we took our recess a week before last is we unlocked the reconciliation process. So let me talk about that a little bit because it doesn't happen all that much. Reconciliation is a different way that we can go about addressing mandatory programs. So mandatory programs are things like Medicare, Medicaid, the SNAP program. These are programs that by and large are on automatic pilot unless Congress does something with them. So that's the mandatory part. And that's actually the largest part of the budget. That's like 2/3. That's actually over 2/3. There's the other part of the budget called discretionary spending. And this you can think about as like just running the agencies. So that's the discretionary part of the budget. But it also includes like Defense Department, things like that. That is a separate, separate line items where we pass 12 appropriations bills, or we're supposed to at least, pass 12 appropriations bills every year to fund those. Now, on the appropriation side, we haven't been doing that process, and that's a problem. And if we want to get into the details of that, we can talk about that a little bit later. But the reconciliation process specifically is supposed to address the mandatory part of the spending. Now, in the past, some programs who were traditionally thought of as discretionary have been made mandatory and put in that mandatory spending to be included in the reconciliation process. Again, that's getting a little bit into the weeds there, but that's what this does. So we passed a budget resolution that would kick off the reconciliation process. Now, what does that mean to kick it off? Well, what that does is it instructs all the committees of jurisdiction to start taking action. So, for example, in our reconciliation bill, we put $175 billion into border security. What the reconciliation process then does is instructs the committee that looks over, Homeland Security to start figuring out, okay, now how are you going to spend that money? You're going to finish building the wall. You're going to hire more prosecutors, hire more judges. There's, approximately, for example, 350,000 illegal immigrants in this country that have criminal charges other than just coming here illegally. 35,000 of those are charged with murder and sexual assault, so they're very dangerous people. So we need to make those folks a priority to apprehend and then ultimately deport. But we need the resources to be able to do that. So that's part of what the reconciliation bill is supposed to address. It's also got $150 billion for our military. We are in the most dangerous time in our country's history since World War II. We have dictators like Putin and Xi in Russia and China, but we also have Iran and North Korea that are really challenging the system that we have today and undermining American leadership and making it a more dangerous world. Obviously, we've seen what's happened with Putin when he invades Ukraine. Xi is looking at trying to take Taiwan by force. We've got to deter that. So that's part of what we want to do on that, is help strengthen our Navy and so forth. And so this would, for example, instruct armed services to go figure out how you're going to spend that. There's also the tax cuts in there too. So in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and our goal is to make those tax cuts permanent. So the Finance Committee will be is instructed then to say, okay, how are you going to do that? And then all the committees then have to say, okay, well, so the finance, again, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is important because if we don't do that, it'll be a $4 trillion increase on the American people. So, for example, the standard deduction would get cut, the child tax credit will get cut by $1,000. So, actually, and then for our farmers and ranchers, the death tax deduction will get cut in half as well. That'll make it harder to pass on family farms and ranches. All that'll happen if those tax cuts expire. Your average family of four making $80,000 a year will see a $1,700 tax increase if those tax cuts expire. So our job is to try and get those extended, and actually our goal is to make it permanent. Now, on the flip side, all the other committees have to go out and find the cost savings to be able to pay for that. So you may have seen some stuff in the paper how the House is like, oh, the Senate, they're not cutting enough out of the budget. We have different rules in the House. So we've set the bar for a lot of these committees kind of low, like $1 billion. But the reason is if we don't hit our targets, we lose the special status we get for the reconciliation bill, and that makes it harder to get passed. So the House has different rules than we do. Our rules are very clear about how we get this priority to be able to do this process, which is why if you see that, oh, you know, this committee or that committee only has to cut $1 billion, that's just to make sure we hit that target. We will be going far above that. In fact, I expect that, you know, if you look compared to what the House set as goals for cutting spending, we'll probably go beyond what the House does. So, but that process is all kicked off by this reconciliation resolution that we passed a couple weeks ago. Now, I expect that process to take a while. This is obviously big, complicated stuff. We've got a lot of work to do, and so maybe we're voting on this in July, but I think it's probably more likely that it happens in September or October. And of course, the tax cuts expire at the end of December, so we've got a hard deadline there. But this is going to be a lot of work between now over the next several months to get this all put in place. So that's a big deal for that we'll be working on a lot over the next several months. You may see a lot of news stories about that, is this whole reconciliation process and what it means and how we're going to pull all this stuff together. What are some of the priorities I've been working on? Well, I've introduced a number of bills that I'll just kind of check off, but a lot of what we've been doing is things that we did here in Nebraska. We call them our Nebraska Solutions Ready for America, and how we can bring that to the rest of the country. So, for example, one of the things that we did here that was very effective was our SNAP Next Step program. This is where we offered our job coaches in the Department of Labor to our families on SNAP, the food stamp program, and help them get better jobs so they could reduce their reliance on SNAP. It's been very effective here in Nebraska, and now we want other states to be able to take advantage of it. So it's a bipartisan bill I've got with Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. Actually, we introduced it in the last Congress, and it's in the framework that Senator Bozeman, who's now the chair of the Ag Committee, has got for his farm bill. So we're working with Senator Gillibrand to get it reintroduced in this Congress, but it was a bipartisan bill in the last Congress. Another bill I've got with Senator Gillibrand is our rural flood program to be able to help with that. And then I've got with Senator, and that's also part of the framework. And then we want to make sure also with Senator Tina Smith, again a Democrat this time from Minnesota, working on rural micro entrepreneurship. So we've got a micro entrepreneurship program that's set to expire. We want to extend it. We want to give more flexibility to it so that, for example, it can be used to renovate buildings, make it so that the loan doesn't have to be, the loan can be a greater percentage of the project, all sorts of different changes to that. And that's also part of the farm work framework. So I'm optimistic about trying to get those things incorporated in the Farm Bill and get them passed. Other things I'm working on are like our Flex Fuel Fairness Act. That would give flex fuel vehicles the same relative tax breaks that EVs get. That's a bipartisan bill with Amy Klobuchar. I've got Biofuels for Ocean-Going Vessels Act, which would allow ocean-going vessels to get credit for using like biodiesel or renewable diesel. That's another bill I've got with Amy Klobuchar. So again, trying to do what we do really well here in Nebraska, which is biofuels. It's a win-win situation, right? It's a win for consumers who save money at the pump. It's a win for cleaning up the environment. It's a win for our farmers and ranchers. And it's a win to make us less dependent on foreign sources of energy. So it's, again, one of those Nebraska solutions, our biofuels, to be able to promote out there and be able to get that done. One of the other things, you look at what we were able to do here in Nebraska, is we were able to phase out the taxes on veterans' military retirement benefits. So we did that, in stages over time. So I've introduced a bill, and Jackie Rosen, Democrat from Nevada, is my co-sponsor on that one, to start phasing out the taxes on veterans' military retirement benefits. The president's also talking about trying to phase out the taxes on Social Security. We did that here in Nebraska a few years ago, again, doing it in stages. I've introduced a bill, the Social Security Check Tax Cut Act, to start phasing out the federal taxes, federal income taxes on Social Security. Again, taking it down a step at a time. So we'll see if that gets incorporated into any of the ideas that the Finance Committee is working on for what this tax package is going to look like through reconciliation. As you know, another thing that we focused on when I was governor is doing a great job of providing services and making sure we were being wise stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So again, I'm working with Jackie Rosen on something called improper payments. Our bill is called the Improper Payments Transparency Act, and what that does is help get more insight into improper payments. And you're like, well, what are improper payments? So improper payments are when we either pay the wrong party, so the federal government sends a check to the wrong person, we pay them too much money, or we don't pay them enough money. And the GAO, Government Accountability Office, estimates that since 2003, we've had $2.7 trillion in improper payments. In 2023, that number was $236 billion. So what our bill does is require the executive branch to give the Congress a report on these improper payments and what they're doing to mitigate those things so that we can get that under control. So now the challenge in getting any of these things done is you got to get a bill that is moving. Things in the Senate take a long time to get done. So I mentioned like some of the other bills I had as part of the farm work framework. We got to get a farm bill passed. We've done the extension twice now. It goes till September 30th. Our farmers and ranchers deserve the certainty. Am I there already? Oh my gosh, we are. I only got 5 minutes left. Let me see if I can wrap up. Joyce knows, she's sitting in the front row here. She gave me the yellow card. She knows I tend to talk too much, so I got to pick it up a little bit. So getting things moving is part of the challenge, which is why we got to get a farm bill done and why getting things into the farm bill gives them a better chance of getting passed. I'm just going to hit upon some other things real quick. We got to get our spending under control. In 2019, pre-pandemic, we spent $4.4 trillion as the federal government. We had a $900 billion budget that year, a budget deficit that year. So we added $900 billion to our debt. Pandemic came along and we took our spending up. The problem is we never took our spending back down to pre-pandemic levels. So if you look in this last chart, 2024, we spent $6.9 trillion. That's a 55% increase in just 5 years. Folks, that's not sustainable. Our population didn't go up that much. Inflation wasn't that much. We got to get that reined in back under control. In 2024, we had a $1.9 trillion deficit. We doubled the deficit. We can't just keep adding $2 trillion in debt to our, right now we're at $36 trillion in debt. It's one of the things that drives inflation. We cannot keep doing that. We got to get this under control, which again will be part of what we tackle in the reconciliation process, plus the other things we got to do with regard to getting a regular appropriations process and so forth. And then the last thing I want to hit upon real quick before we go to Q&A is tariffs. A lot of people ask me about tariffs. I got this chart over here on the left, which is actually our agricultural trade. I know you can't really see it. The thing I want to point out is just like on the far left end, the last few recent years, you can see it's red. That means we got an agricultural trade deficit. The Biden administration was the first administration since Carter not to do a trade deal. And they didn't really promote our products. And so what we saw is we had an agricultural trade deficit where usually we've always been trade surpluses, but it was like 16 billion, then going to 32 billion, and then like, I think it's estimated this year to be 49 billion. And one of the things that the president wants to do is level the playing field on tariffs. The world charges us 4 times the level of tariffs on an average weighted value basis than we charge the rest of the world. And you might say, well, how did we get there? Well, actually, we did that on purpose. We set up the system. It goes back to World War II. In 1944, we had a conference in Brent Woods, New Hampshire, where we were looking about the post-war. And what we said is we're going to have low tariffs so countries can export their goods to us. Other countries will have high tariffs, which makes it harder for us to export our products to them. But we're going to do that to help them develop their industries to recover from World War II, because we're the only major industry or industrial power that wasn't devastated. So we're going to help those countries that way. But importantly, we did it because we wanted to get those countries on our side against the Soviet Union. The system worked wonderfully well. The problem is the Soviet Union fell 34 years ago, and the system was not changed. And now our allies have gotten used to the sweetheart deal they've gotten, and the president wants to get that leveled out. So, for example, let's just talk a lot about agriculture. We import about $29 billion of Australian beef every year. Australia imports 0 of ours. They block all of ours. And this is something I saw as governor all the time when I led trade missions. Either through tariffs or non-tariff trade barriers, countries would block our products from going to their country. The European Union, for example, they will take our biotech soybeans, but not our biotech corn. And when I had this conversation with Phil Hogan, who was then the Ag Commissioner for the EU, he said, yeah, we know there's no scientific reason to block your biotechnology, but we have a lot of NGOs who create trouble, and so politically, we just can't take your corn. Well, that's a problem. Mexico, who just signed USMCA, is blocking our corn as well right now for cultural reasons. Japan, which we have the largest military presence outside the United States, is in Japan, but they would put limits on how much beef they would take from us. Vietnam has a 30% tariff on our beef. Thailand's got a 50% tariff. I was talking to Jan Ten Bensel about biofuels. Our tariff on Brazilian ethanol coming to this country is 0. They have an 18% tariff on our ethanol going to Brazil. Taiwan has a 17% tariff on our products, our agricultural products going to that country. I don't think there's anybody who would deny that Taiwan's not going to be there unless the United States is there. So these are some of the things the president wants to level the playing field on. Here's just another example. I think the tariff Germany charges on us, our cars going into Germany is like 25%, and our tariff's 2.5%. So we want to level it out. The same thing true for Japan. They've got tariff barriers to stop our cars from going there. So those are the sort of things the president wants to get leveled out. So he announced this big tariff stuff, got everybody's attention. Now he's got 35 or 75 countries that have come to him and say they wanted to negotiate trade deals. I was just in the Philippines and Taiwan. I can tell you they're not mad. They see this as a business deal, and they want to negotiate. So, for example, I sat down with at dinner with Vice President Xiao, who's the Vice President of Taiwan, and she's like, you know, we're willing to talk to you about all this stuff. We've made proposals to the Trump administration. In fact, we were already talking to Howard Lutnick. We've already been in conversations. I'm like, great. They're prioritizing you. Try and get this deal done fast. She's like, she's like, hey, we buy our soybeans from Brazil. We'll start buying them from you now. We buy our liquid natural gas from Australia. We'll start buying it from you now. So they're open to buying more of our products. Now they said, hey, but we also need some help. So, for example, we double tax Taiwanese companies who want to make investments in this country. So we need to get that right. So I made the commitment to work with Senator Coons, who's a Democrat from Delaware, who also sits on foreign relations, to work on that tax treaty. So we're going to take that back and try and get that done as part of our commitment. So there's a lot of work we need to do with regard to it. The president's, put a 90-day pause on this. These are big, complicated things. I expect it's probably going to take longer than 90 days to get around to all these different countries. But that's part of the reason why the president's doing this, trying to level the playing field so that when we're shipping our goods overseas, we're on a level playing field with what other countries are trying to do here, ultimately trying to get to, again, we'll get to questions and answers in just a minute. So we got to get a level playing field for our folks being able to get there. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this. It's going to be a process. It's going to create some disruption. But the idea is to get this done so we can get beyond it and have that level playing field. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up to questions and answers. Again, please just, when you get up to say ask your questions, say your name and where you're from, and then we can dig into any of these topics in more in detail, or we can go into other topics as well. And we got Noah's got a microphone. You got a couple of hands up over here.
Just
Brad's
quickly,
over there.
To the audience, we're going to ask the people just line up, and then we'll do the questions that way. So we'll do it first come, first serve. Thank you.
Yep, and trying to keep your questions relatively brief. I'll try to keep my answers relatively brief so we can get to as many questions as possible.
And Senator, just as the people are lining up, I have a question for you. This is a written question from the audience. So Senator, are you going to make the tax cuts permanent?
So okay, that's a fast and easy one while everybody's lining up. The answer is that was our goal, is to be able to make the tax cuts permanent.
Hi, I'm Michelle Moser. I'm from Norfolk, Nebraska. And my question, I'm a retired attorney with the Internal Revenue Service, State and Gift Tax Division. You were talking here a little bit about reducing the deficit that we have. With DOGE, you guys have decimated the Internal Revenue Service and many other government agencies. I know in the Estate and Gift Tax Division, half of their program has just taken the deferred retirement plan, and so they will be losing those. For the people in the audience that don't know, the federal estate tax doesn't come into play unless you have $14 million, with $28 million to a husband and wife team. So that's quite a bit of that's exempt. Probably wouldn't impact most of the people in this room. The IRS, for every dollar you spend, they make you $6, and for high-income taxpayers, they make you $13. I want to know when you and the other Republicans in Congress are going to step up to the president, or stand up against the president, and say some of these cuts are too much. We're damaging all of our government agencies. We're damaging all of the institutions that we have. We're losing Medicare, Medicaid, and things like that. And I don't see any benefit to doing that to all of the people in the public.
Well, thank you for your feedback on that with regard to what's going on in the IRS. As I mentioned, if you're looking at the chart over there, we got to get our spending under control, and the administration is going through that process of looking at what can they do. If you guys interrupt, we'll have fewer time for questions. If you guys interrupt, we're going to have fewer time for questions. So, and just so you know, behind the scenes, there's been a number of conversations with the administration on different things they're doing. So I'll give you a couple examples that aren't directly related to the IRS. But one of the things, so we are talking, to your question was, are we going to talk to the administration? The answer is yes. I've already done it on things like tariffs. So, for example, when he first announced his tariffs, I had conversations with a number of cabinet members about, hey, here's how it's going to impact Kawasaki and Lincoln. They employ a lot of people. It's a $100 million impact. If they lay off people, that's a problem. You're hurting Americans, and specifically Nebraskans, if you don't fix this. Or on the stuff with USAID, I said there's obviously things that we don't want to spend money on, but there's also good things we do that help promote U.S. interests around the world. So I talked specifically, I had a conversation with Marco Rubio about those. So those conversations are ongoing with regard to different issues about what they're doing and how we're, what's the right way forward, and to try and say, hey, we got to make sure we're taking an approach where we're still preserving the kind of things that we did here at the state of Nebraska, which is do a good job of providing services and get our expenses under control. Next.
Hi, my name is Bryce Grothman. I am from here in Kearney. I want to preface this by saying thank you for taking time to come here and answer questions. You are braver than most Republicans. I just want to ask, when 16 UNL students lost their funding to go teach at low-income schools, where were you? When international students going to the Nebraska University just had their visas revoked, where were you? When the National Weather Service lost funding for weather balloons, where were you? You're supposed to represent us, and you're not here.
Well, hey, thank you for that feedback. So on a lot of those issues, I know some of the decisions that are being made are going to be tough. We've got to get our spending under control, as we talked about. Some of those issues impact spending. And so when it comes to, for example, like the visas, if somebody has an issue with their visa or any other issue, we've got one of the things that we work really hard on is constituent services. So if somebody has an issue, contact our office and we'll review those. We do that all the time for people who have visa issues. And as I mentioned before, we are having conversations with administration behind the scenes. And so you mentioned, I'm trying to think of all the things you talked about. So the student visas, which I said if you got a problem with your visa, you can contact us. Again, scholarships, we got to, again, get that spending under control. So that's going to be part of it as well. And then what was the third thing? What was the third thing? Weather balloons, right. Actually, in that one in particular, again, we got a great delegation. Mike Flood took the lead on that to sit down with the weather station because we work together as a team and we have these conversations with the administration. We don't necessarily put out a press release when we do, but we do work behind the scenes to address those things. So, go ahead, next question.
Thank you. My name is John McDermott. I'm from Grand Island. Here's what I want to know. Social Security is entirely self-funded through designated payroll taxes. Americans pay this tax on the income they receive up to $176,100 per year. What that means is the vast majority of people in this room pay Social Security taxes on 100%, every penny of what they earn in a year. Conversely, the wealthiest people in this country, billionaires, people like yourself, Senator, pay Social Security taxes on only a tiny percentage of their annual income. If we simply eliminated this cap, we would not only ensure the financial stability of Social Security for future generations, but we would expand its benefits for working Americans in their retirement years. What I want to know, Senator, is why you think reducing or eliminating benefits that Social Security recipients receive is a better idea than simply lifting the cap and making the richest pay their fair share.
Well, protecting Social Security is one of the priorities President Trump has already talked about. He said he doesn't want anybody to lose their Social Security benefits or anything like that. And there is no doubt that we have got an issue with Social Security as we have had, I'm sure you know all the stats with regard to how many people paid into the system when the system was first created back in the 30s, and now we're down to like between 2 and 3 people paying into the system right now. So again, figuring out a solution to protect Social Security is not going to be an easy thing. There's been a number of solutions that have been proposed, and there are a number of solutions that people have been talking about within the U.S. Senate to be able to address it. I can't tell you that I've got a solution for you right now that is gaining consensus on what would get past both the Senate and the House and get to the President's desk. So there's a number of different solutions people are talking about to be able to do it. Like I said, I can't tell you there's a solution right now that's gaining consensus on this, but it is something that I know they're talking about in the Senate because I've been a part of those conversations about how we address this. There's conversations going on the House side as well. One thing I do want to say, though, is there's been a lot of talk about cutting Social Security through the reconciliation process. By law, you actually can't touch Social Security through the reconciliation process. So that just patently false right there. You can't cut Social Security because you can't address it there as well. So there's a number of different things we can do, but nothing has gotten a consensus on how we address it going forward.
All right.
Yeah.
My name is Burke, and I'm from 16 County. My question is that you were appointed to the seat by your political ally, Governor Pillin, after donating heavily to his campaign, but now you're voting for tax breaks, corporate tax breaks that benefit your family's wealth and your personal $160 million personal wealth. How is this not a conflict of interest, and why should Nebraskans not see this as insider trading?
As I talked about a little bit earlier, the tax cuts that were put in place in 2017 are set to expire at the end of this year. So we are working to make sure that we extend those, and we want to make them permanent. As I mentioned before, the average family of four making $80,000 would see a $1,700 tax increase. Middle-income families saw their rates go down. So if they expire, taxes are going up for everybody. And with regard to my appointment, I got appointed to fill out 2 years of Ben Sasse's term. Last year, I ran in a special election to finish out the last 2 years of Ben Sasse's term, and then I'm up for another 6-year term in this cycle. So yes, I was appointed, but I ran to finish out the rest of Ben's term, and now we're running again. And so what was so again, I supported Jim. So all the things from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were passed, obviously, before I got there. And what we're talking to do is extending those. So it has nothing to do with what you're talking about there, because what we're trying to do is just keep current policy in place. Oh, we're going to Brad now?
I'm Mark Sutko from Kearney, Nebraska here, and thank you for being here, Senator. I'll make this quick. You mentioned the Financial Consumer Protection Bureau, and you said it wasn't doing its job that was created in 2008, 9, and 10 at the last recession. Is that bureau still in existence?
The CFPB is still around, yes. What I said was that it had tried to expand its scope outside what the law Congress passed. So Congress gave them authority over the banking system, but not payments. These are like Venmo is not a bank. So it doesn't have authority to be able to regulate them like they did the banking. So it stepped out the lines of what Congress said, and that's the regulation we pulled back in.
Okay, it's my understanding that that's been dismantled.
No, CFPB is still there. It's not. The current person has downsized some of the staff, but the CFPB is still there.
On the downsizing, that program was put together to protect the consumers. I retired 8 years ago from the financial industry. I was on the Fed board when we created that bureau. Don't downsize it. We need to protect everybody here relative to consumer protection.
So in addition to the CFPB, the organizations looking out for consumers in the banking industry include the Fed, the FDIC, the FTC, the OCC, and, importantly, your state banking regulators. And I can tell you that, having been governor and had the banking department report to me, that if any consumer had a complaint about a bank, and I don't care what size the bank was, we would have investigated that complaint and got to the bottom of what the consumer is complaining about. So there are multiple organizations that are out there protecting consumers when it comes to banking. The CFPB is just one, but there's a number of other ones that are doing it, including right here in Nebraska.
My name is Colin. I'm from Hastings. RFK Jr. has just announced he wants to create a disease database that would track autistic people using private medical data. Do you have any plans to oppose this? You represent some 30,000 plus autistic people in the state of Nebraska. They are your constituents too. This is a horrifying overreach of government and should scare the hell out of everybody.
So I got to tell you, I just know what I know about what RFK Jr. is planning on doing is what I heard about and read about in the paper. So I don't have the details right offhand. I can tell you what the goal is to try and see if there is something that is causing autism that we can then address. So I don't have all the details to be able to tell you about what's in that program, or I do know that, again, they were trying to use private stuff, but I can't tell you. So I can't tell you right now whether or not I'm going to oppose or not because I don't have the details on it. I can tell you what I heard in the paper about what they're trying to do and what the goal is, which is, I think the goal of trying to address what is the causes of autism is a good one. Whether this is the right way to do it or not, I'd have to dig into it more. But if you contact our office, we'll get back to you when we know more about it. Yeah?
I'm Colin Wilkie from here in Kearney. In recent months, many tens of thousands of federal workers have lost their jobs. How many congressional or senatorial staff have lost their jobs?
So with regard to the number, the jobs, we have not laid anybody off in my office. We have a normal tradition or normal turnover, as you might expect when we hire people back, but we haven't laid anybody off in my office. No? All right. No, we're going to go to some of the written questions?
Absolutely, Senator. Okay, so Sue Greenwald from Kearney is asking, please comment on the SAVE Act passed by the House. Will the Senate follow suit?
With regard to the SAVE Act, I don't, again, a lot of the time with all these things, it's just tough to get things passed in the Senate just because it takes a long time to do it. The House passes a lot of bills. They have different rules about how they pass stuff. So, Sue, I don't know if we're going to be taking that up in the Senate or not. So I haven't had a chance to review it yet, so I don't know the answer to that. But when it comes over in the Senate, we'll take a look at it.
Okay, next written question. What do you believe is the biggest issue facing Nebraskans right now, and what are you doing about it?
So the two biggest issues that we deal with as a country, the things that are existential threats to our country, one is China deterrence and making sure China doesn't start World War III by trying to take Taiwan by force. I was just in Taiwan last week talking to officials there about what we can do to be able to continue to discourage Xi Jinping from trying to take that by force. The second biggest thing we have to face is our debt domestically. We're at $36 trillion in debt. We're now spending more on interest than we are on national defense. We've got to get our spending under control to be able to manage that. So working on both those issues are the two biggest things I'm working on.
Okay, and last written question. Do you support funding the Department of Education?
The Department of Education actually has some very important functions that we ought to keep. For example, one of the things is student loans. And we make sure that those loans are being serviced. That's very important because if we don't and people are defaulting, then we actually stand to lose more in defaulted loans than we would make by cutting the services to be able to service those loans. So that's an example of one of the things the Department of Education does. We've got to make sure we keep funding. So. Next question.
Senator, I'm Dale Gibbs. I live here in Kearney. Thank you very much for coming here and listening to our questions. Over my voting age period, I have been a Democrat, a Republican, and now I'm a nonpartisan, mainly because I'm fed up with both sides blaming the other party for the extremism on each side. That's all that the parties seem to be focusing on. So that's why I'm nonpartisan. We've got to change it. And I think that's one of the reasons the last senatorial election was Mr. Osborne did very well, surprisingly. So I think a lot more people are very fed up with this too. So I encourage you to not do that. My question is, we seem to be coming into a constitutional crisis with courts making their rulings and President Trump ignoring them. When it comes down to this constitutional crisis, which we pretty sure is going to happen, where will you stand, with President Trump or the Constitution?
There is no doubt our entire system is based upon the rule of law and making sure we follow the Constitution. The executive branch overstepping or trying to expand its authority is not new. The Biden administration did it as well. And that's why we have courts to be able to go through and adjudicate those things. If you look right now what's going on, so for example, let's take some of the examples that have been in front of the courts right now. So, for example, on the DEI grant scholarships, Trump was trying to cut all that funding, and that got put on hold. That was, given an injunction, and right now the Trump administration hasn't cut those grants. If you look at the one where he's trying to lay off the probationary employees, that was a temporary injunction that the Trump administration stopped laying people off until the Supreme Court ruled. So the Trump administration primarily is obeying these things. The one that's probably coming to mind, that you're probably thinking about most of all, is, well, I'm going to give you the example that you're all thinking of, because this is the only case you can point to where they're not doing it probably to your satisfaction, and that's the Abrego Garcia one, where he was deported. They admitted it was a mistake, and the Supreme Court said they had to facilitate him coming back to this country. Now, facilitate is kind of a vague word, and El Salvador is its own country, so we've got the issue of what their law is. Abrego Garcia is an El Salvadoran citizen, and being able to get him back isn't necessarily straightforward. But the administration was working on, has said they're working on that, and I might point out some of the other stuff where they were going through this deportation process. The Supreme Court told them to freeze it, and they have. So. I will always uphold the Constitution and always support the rule of law.
Hi, my name is Melanie Knight, and I'm from Clay Center, Nebraska. I am the daughter of a Korean War vet, as well as the niece of 2 Korea War vets and a Vietnam War vet. I'm also the sister of an Iraqi War and Afghanistan vet. I have been a member of the American Legion Auxiliary for decades and have received their monthly newsletter. For decades, they have repeatedly said that the VA is understaffed and underfunded. We know that 25% of the government workforce is veterans and 30% of the VA, is comprised of veterans. You have been on the record for saying DOGE is, quote, doing the right thing, end quote, and have not made any comments in regards to any of these cuts to the VA and to veterans losing their jobs. So, my question to you, Senator, is who's lying? The American Legion and Auxiliary, or you?
So everybody always would like to have more resources, no doubt about that. And we got a lot of work to do. But we also have to balance it off with controlling our spending. So you got to balance this stuff off, just like we did when I was governor of Nebraska, where we worked on how we did a better job providing services while controlling our expenses at the same time. So we have to take care of our veterans. We have to take care of our veterans, and we have to make sure that we're doing a good job of that. We also have to keep our expenses in line and make sure we're doing it in a way that's cost effective.
Hi there, Senator. And I do appreciate you coming and taking all these questions. My name is Andrew McCarty. I'm from Hastings. I'm a locally elected official, so I understand how people can be upset and ask some questions and ask some really tough questions, so I appreciate you standing up there. As you can see, I work in healthcare, and so I'm going to stay in my lane with this question. I could ask a bunch of different questions that people have already asked, probably, but I have a lot of concerns with the proposed Medicaid cuts. And what that's going to do to healthcare in the rural part of this state is going to be devastating. So it's not just our rural hospitals that would close and suffer. It would be our long-term care facilities. There's a lot of older people in this room. You wouldn't have a facility to go to eventually because they'd all be closed. And I'm just curious if you or your staff has reached out to NHA to discuss this with them, or any rural facility to talk about this with them, because if the proposed Medicaid cuts go through, people will lose their jobs, they'll lose access to health care, and facilities will close across the state.
The president said he doesn't want anybody to have their Medicaid benefits cut. And as I mentioned, when we kicked off this reconciliation process, that's one of the things that's going to be looked at. So certainly we know how important Medicaid is and how it takes care of, especially looking at kids or disabled, that we've got to do it. It's an important program. The whole process of reconciliation, though, is about going through to figure out how we're going to make this all work. And so we don't know what has been proposed yet for Medicaid, because that process has just barely started. So as we go through that process, though, and we start seeing what is being proposed by the different committees, specifically the one, our HELP committee in the Senate, that's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. That's where we'll take a look at what is being proposed and how it's going to be managed in Medicaid. And then that would be the time when we get specifics on the table that are coming from that Senate committee to reach out and talk to people about how that potentially could impact our rural hospitals and everybody else who's served by Medicaid. Well, I thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. Recently, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said that she's scared. In relation to that statement, I have a three-part question for you. First, do you fear for your physical well-being and that of your family? Second, do you fear intense political retaliation if you do stand up to the president? And third, do you fear you may not be reelected if you do not stand up to the president? So, physical well-being, damned if you do, and perhaps damned if you don't.
So, first of all, with regard to fearing for my physical well-being, I've never been threatened as a governor or senator or anything else. And so that really hasn't been something I've ever felt that physical fear. With regard to my running for re-election and all the other, I have always been pretty clear where I stand on stuff. When I ran as governor, I laid out all those things. When I ran for governor, I laid out where I stood on different issues, and the voters of Nebraska had an opportunity to weigh in, and I got elected twice. I just got elected to that special 2-year term, and then I'm running again. So you'll all get a chance to weigh in again with regard to that. And with regard to disagreeing with the president, again, I've already used a couple of examples of how when I was concerned about his policies, I reached out to the appropriate cabinet members to say, hey, here's what's going to happen, the consequences of what your decisions are, to say, you guys need to be thinking about these things as you're going through this decision-making process. So the answer is, I will continue to be who I've always been. You've seen me 8 years as governor. You've seen me for 2 years as senator. That's what I'm running on as I look for this full 6-year term.
And Senator, this is time for the last question.
Glad I'm still here to get it. I got a Dear John letter from you. My name's John Stritt from Kearney, Nebraska. So I got a Dear John letter response from an email that I sent to you. And I had a couple emails that I've been sending, and I'd encourage any of you that don't have his email address to send it, because he promptly does respond. So there's your kudos for that. My question really deals with Ukraine, and we haven't had much talk about that or federal spending on that. But at the end of February, this initiated my reason for sending you this message. President Zelensky, President Trump, Vice President Vance had a discussion in the White House, which led to what I think was a downturn in terms of relationships between the United States and their support for the country of Ukraine. In response, you sent this email to me. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin and Russian forces launched into an illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity while setting off the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. A Ukrainian victory is our national security interest, Simply put, Vladimir Putin is a dictator and will continue to pursue his imperial ambition unless stopped. We typically don't hear any response in regards to how you see the United States' role is in support of Ukraine. And I think, again, going back to a previous question, it's for fear of what the President and Vice President is going to say about you. Is this continue to be your supporting purpose, that you support Ukraine and that their efforts in succeeding against Russian imperialism is important for not only their country, but for our country and the world at large?
Yes, I support Ukraine. Let me tell you why it's in our national interest. Because as I put in that email, Vladimir Putin is a dictator. And not only has he told us what he's going to do, it's something that historically Russia has always tried to do, which is expand their borders. But Putin actually started talking about this. Frankly, he gave us indications about this at a 2008 NATO summit, spoke to NATO leaders at a NATO summit that basically indicated he was going to try and expand the territory. He sees Ukraine as being part of Russian territory, but also parts of Poland, and he's called the Baltic states rogue states. Like other dictators, he says what he's going to do and he's trying to go do it. If he's successful in Ukraine, he will try to do that other places as well. And for example, if he invades the Baltic states, their NATO allies, that's World War III. So that's why it's in our interest to make sure that Vladimir Putin gets stopped in Ukraine. And if you want, what I think, I could go a little bit further on what I think President Trump's strategy on this is, if you have an interest. So, to get Vladimir Putin to the table, he can't be seen as losing. He's surrounded by a bunch of oligarchs who are super nationalists. So if he looks like he's losing, they will take him out, and probably the next person's going to be worse. So you have to have some agreement that not only Zelensky can live with, but Putin can live with, because it's an existential threat for him personally. And that's where President Trump is trying to walk this line to give him the room to come to the table. Now, it may not be successful. And then President Trump's going to have to come up with another strategy for how to deal with Putin. Put more sanctions on Russia, give him more weapons, whatever it would be. There may be another strategy, and we'll probably know that in the not-too-distant future to see whether or not Putin's actually going to be serious about trying to come to some negotiated settlement. So but it's important to remember that Putin can only do that if he thinks somehow he can go back to his people and say, I got something where I won. And, of course, Zelensky's going to have his own things, his own red lines. Zelensky's not going to sign any deal that doesn't guarantee Ukraine's security. So he's got to feel good about that. So this is a tough nut to crack, but at least we're now talking to both sides. Not that we'll necessarily get a solution, but at least we're talking. So anyway, I want to be respectful of everybody's time because we have gone 5 minutes past noon. But thank you all again very much for being here. I appreciate the feedback from everybody with regard to the different issues that we face here, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
NCN